So have you ever had a customer tell you that your pricing is too high? There's usually an inclination in those moments to blame the client. The thinking is they don't know what they're talking about. How could they possibly go with someone cheaper? We're much better. How could they question our pricing? But if you want to get really good at closing business, then we need to take back the responsibility. So I'm going to break down for you why you might be getting those price objections. But first, I want to share a little story. So the story is about a hairdresser named Sally. She lives in a really small town outside of Toronto. It's a population of a few hundred people. She's the only hairdresser in town. And she's always been very, very fair with her pricing. She charges $30 for a haircut. Well, one day she was cutting one of her clients' hair, and her client said, I have a cousin named Bob, who's also a hairdresser. He's moving to town, and he's thinking about opening up shop. Would you be willing to meet with Bob and maybe give him a rundown of your business in the town? She said, no problem. She met with Bob. She told Bob, look, I love good competition. There's more than enough business to go around. I will happily help you out with your business, and I hope that you'll do the same if I ever need you. The only thing I ask is whatever you do, please don't undercut my pricing. So Bob agreed. And one day, Sally was about a week later, she was walking to her hair salon, and she noticed as she got closer to her hair salon that there was what looked like a hair salon going into the empty building that was across the street from her. And as she walked closer and closer, she craned her neck and she could see a sign in the front window, and it said $25 haircuts. So Sally was disheartened at that very moment. Her heart dropped, and she realized that Bob had done the very thing he promised he wouldn't do. He undercut her pricing. So the big question is, what do you think Sally did next? And what would you do in that situation? Well, the answer is that Sally got to work on her very own sign, which she very proudly displayed in her window the very next day. And that sign said, I fix $25 haircuts. So the moral of the story here is that there will always be a cheapest option in any market. And if that's not the position that you've chosen, then you better have a very clear explanation of the value you provide for the premium you charge. So there are two big influences that impact someone's likelihood to buy from you. The first that I want to talk about is motivation. So that's their motivation to purchase. If they don't have motivation, which is usually pain-driven, something that needs solving right now, they likely won't buy. And the second is the impact. The second impact is their perceived value. So what I mean by that is if they don't see value in what they're going to purchase, then they'll spend their money elsewhere. So I want to take a look at this a little bit closer, and I'm going to share my screen with you here. So let's build out a quadrant where the vertical axis is motivation, low and high, and then the horizontal axis is perceived value, low and high. So what we want to do here is if your customer has low perceived value and low motivation, this is what we call off radar. Okay, so what we mean by that is no one is buying in this quadrant, and they're certainly not buying from you. Now, if your customer is low motivation, but high perceived value, this is what we would call bucket list. Right? So one day I hope to purchase this, but the need or pain isn't great enough for me to do it right now. If your customer is low perceived value and high motivation, they're buying, but not from you, unless you're the cheapest. And this is what we call the low price trap, right? Because they don't see the value in you, and therefore you either have to compete at the lowest price or suffer the consequence, which is that your customer goes with someone who's lower priced. And then we've got the golden quadrant here, which is high motivation and high perceived value. This is a real customer. Okay. So if you are hearing you're too expensive, then it's very likely that you are on this side of the matrix over here. So if you're hearing you're too expensive, then you're on this side of the matrix here. You're either off radar or you're in the low price track, but most likely you're here. Now let's just change the color here. So most likely you are in the low price trap here. Okay. And this is a value issue. So I want to tell you 5 reasons why you are losing out to your lower price competitors. So let's start with number 1. You haven't created enough friction. People are more motivated to buy when the chasm or the gap between where they are and where or who they want to be is clearly emphasized and as big as possible. If they don't see a big enough gap, then they are comfortable staying where they are or going with somebody who's lower priced. 2, you haven't quantified the value. In other words, you haven't told them what they can stand to earn or save in real numbers by working with you. You can watch my What's One Shift You Can Make to Charge More video for more details on this. But at the end of the day, what you're able to charge is a direct reflection of the value you sell to your clients. 3, you sound like everybody else that's selling to them. I want you to imagine that you need socks. I sell socks, so I try and sell you these red cotton socks for $5. Now they look the same as the other red socks that you were looking at for $2.50. So why would you spend double with me? Well, you wouldn't unless you had a good reason. But if I told you that these socks were worn by Mick Jagger in his last concert, all of a sudden $5 sounds like the best deal on the planet. So if you look, feel, and sound like everybody else in your market, your customer will pay the lowest possible price. 4, you're overpriced. In other words, the price you're charging is more than the value you generate for your customer. If I said to you, give me $1 and I'll make you 50 cents, would you give me that dollar? Probably not. The value you generate should exceed your fees. Otherwise, you're overpriced and you fall into the category of an expense, not an investment. And you have to remember that expenses are the first things to be scrutinized when you need to cut spend, like in times of recession. 5, you're selling to the wrong customer. There will always be price shoppers or people who don't appreciate the value you provide because it's just not aligned with their needs or pains. Your job is to identify these people before you submit pricing so you don't waste hours and resources trying to get them to become a customer. Or worse, lower your pricing and then spend weeks or months or even years trying to make them happy and hating every minute of it. So if you've heard you're just too expensive, now you know why. You need to think about whether your prospective customer is highly motivated to buy and if they see true value in you and what you have to offer. So I want to hear what you think. Comment below and let me know your key takeaway from this video.